happy to be here during the week, and I just want to thank you all for coming and being a part of these conversations and being a part of this forum. That can better our communities and empower our neighbors as well. That's one of our missions here, to empower partnerships and to build community together. So I want to thank you all for coming out and joining us. I also want to give a few layouts of the land. So we have bathrooms in the back right corner. So in case anyone needed that, and I will with Jim as well, and he's going to continue for the rest of the conversation.
Thank you, Jen. Good morning. My name is Jim Lappy. I'm one of a handful of co-organizers of today's forum, Community Forum, bringing participatory budgeting to Portland region. We're going to get to see a number of our co-organizers up here today and see as we go along. So I'm going to just briefly talk about our goals for the day and provide a little overview of what we'll be doing. But first, I want to say today's event, as it is being organized by mostly a group of volunteers working under the auspices of Healthy Democracy, which is a U.S.-based nonpartisan nonprofit organization designed to coordinate innovative deliberative democracy programs. We're actually based here in Portland. I encourage you to go to their website, healthydemocracy.org, and check them out. They're an award-winning organization. They've pioneered the implementation of the Citizen Initiative, which is a really cool program I think started in Oregon and now is in a couple other states. Tries to insert deliberative democracy into the citizen initiative, ballot initiative process. This forum started with a group, as I said, volunteers from Gresham and Portland who really wanted to further the conversation about bringing participatory budgeting to Portland after then candidate Mayor Wheeler mentioned it in a candidate forum back in spring of 2016. So we went around asking local governments and a local foundation to sponsor this event, and they agreed. The City of Portland is a sponsor, the Oregon Community Foundation, the City of Gresham, Metro, and Multnomah County. So we're really grateful for these sponsors to investing in democratic innovation in our community. So today, our goals for the forum are to convene and diverse community leaders and local government staff to discuss and explore the potential benefits and challenges of participatory budgeting and bringing it to our region, to generate ideas, interest, and momentum for experimenting with participatory budgeting in our region, and to support and inform future implementation in the region. And actually, last week, and most importantly, I think, to connect constituencies, bring people together who are interested in seeing this happen, and hopefully to support efforts as they go forward. Because one thing you'll learn about participatory budgeting is it's a process that is driven, needs to be driven as much by a community as the whole government. And in that respect, I wanted just to say personally, in terms of what my personal goals for the day, I was thinking about this morning. I was reminded of a quote from actually Brian Lawler's book by a participatory budgeting advocate in Brazil who became involved in both government implementing it. And I don't have his name, but he said, quite simply, participatory budgeting is not only about public works, it's about creating community. And we're not going to do participatory budgeting today, we're going to just participatory activities, but we're going to be talking about it, and I certainly hope we can begin creating a community around this, well, deepening participatory democracy in our region in general. And when I say community, I want to be specific. I don't mean the nostalgic notion of community that we in Portland often sentimentalize with, I think, sometimes ill effects in terms of inclusiveness of that notion of community. I mean, I'm not talking about the virtual community of interest that is really kind of come to dominate our social and political life, but really the community grounded in personal relationships and face-to-face deliberation. And I think that remains, I personally think that remains a foundation to help our democracy, personal interactions and relations. So with that, briefly, what we're going to do, we're going to have an overview today. We will have some wonderful speakers that we brought here from around the country. to talk about what participatory budgeting is, how it's been implemented across the globe, across North America and the Pacific Northwest. And then we're going to shift at lunch in the early afternoon. We're going to hear from you, and you're going to hear from each other to talk about participatory budgeting and how we might bring it to this region. And after lunch, the first round of what we're calling cafe conversations, we're actually going to do some real-time voting. We've got collective ideas from the room to get people's collective thinking through some online voting or some real-time voting. And at the end, we'll share that voting, and we'll also share the winner of our raffle prize for those completing our evaluations, which are on your tables. So feel free to do that throughout the day. There'll be a specific time we'll make for doing that later. And lastly, we're going to try to move swiftly through this. We'll have a couple breaks to get you moving, but please take care of yourself, use the bathrooms, get snacks as needed. So we'll only have a couple times when we're breaking all together. Well, with that, I want to thank you again for coming. I'm going to pass it off to another one of my co-organizers to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Oliver. I'm the community organizer in the Montville Neighborhood Association and one of the board of Southeast Chapter. I'm here to welcome our first guest, who will help us understand the global scale of participatory budgeting and contextualize the historical moment where we find ourselves here today. Brian Wampler, a political science professor at Boise State University School of Public Service, and an active researcher, thinker, and contributor to participatory democratic strategies. He is the author of 2 books, Participatory Budgeting in Brazil, Cooperation, Contestation, and Accountability, as well as Activating Democracy in Brazil, Popular Participation, Social Justice, and Interlocking Institutions. His works have been published and funded by the likes of the National Science Foundation, the Ash Center for Democracy at Harvard, and the World Bank. Please join me in welcoming Brian Wampler to Portland.
Thank you. Thank you first to Jamal and the organizers. It's great to have such a well-organized and well-attended conference. It's a great way to start thinking about the new processes and processes that are pretty helpful. I want to start first with a story that really captured my attention from about 20 years ago. That really got me thinking about why this process of participatory budgeting was new. And so about 20 years ago, I was in a founding city, Porto Alegre, Brazil, and it was a June, July evening. It was sort of winter down there, so it was in the 50s. I was at a meeting it was an outside meeting, and there were a couple hundred people there. And the question was, how were they going to spend the equivalent of about $500,000 for their district? Most of the residents were low income, low educated. This was an unusual situation in the context of Brazil, where oftentimes these well-educated, well-community industry dominated these sort of public forums. And here you had an environment where it was mainly people from the local Shannon County trying to figure out how to spend $500,000. The issue became, were they going to invest in a healthcare clinic, or were they going to invest in a pedestrian overpass over a busy road that cut through their neighborhood? And what was really fascinating about the conversation is you had a series of speakers get up, and they were talking about the responsibility of the government to provide resources. They were talking about what was the best use of the resources. Was it to invest in a local healthcare clinic to make it easier for expectant mothers to get prenatal care, to make it easier on the elderly to get regular checkups, or another group argued that they needed to do the pedestrian overpass because people had been killed the previous year trying to cross this busy road. So what was the responsibility of the community and the citizens? This debate took on for a couple of hours. At the end of the evening, there was a vote, and the healthcare clinic won. And then I went back to this community a couple of years later, and the healthcare clinic had been built. Okay, so this is a really good good example of citizens making decisions, voting in public, making a binding decision that the government then implements. So let me just walk through. Let me just walk through a little bit for those of you who are sort of new to this idea. So the idea behind participatory budgeting, the core idea is that it's a democratic policy-making process in which incremental decisions are made, and citizens make binding votes that result in government action. And the classic difference between the town hall model or the deliberative model or the sort of a town hall meeting style in the United States is that it's not just a one-way going from the citizen to the government where you sort of have input from the citizen making their complaining or making their answer, but it's citizens trying to figure out how they would use resources to spend on how they spend public resources. Okay. The first case in the southern part of Brazil was started in the context of a democratic renewal. Brazil had a dictatorship from 1964 to 1985, and there was a lot of effort to try to figure out how can we move beyond the confines of representative democracy? What can we do differently? And the idea was that we want to sort of sustain the mobilization of people. We want to get people involved in government, but we also want to do this within the context of having a regular election cycle. Elections were identified as being important, as we know, but then there was a recognition that this government's made decisions throughout the year. So it was an effort to try to get people more involved in that process. The first year in this city, the city's about 1.3 million, there were 1,000 people. Very low, I mean, sort of 1.3 million, 1,000 people making decisions. It wasn't that high, but what happened is the government followed through. Decisions that were made in those forums then resulted in those communities receiving those projects, and in a couple of years, you have around 30,000 people a year participating in the process. And then in other cities in Brazil, you have something similar. So you sort of get this really robust growth, with at one point they were signing about $100 million US. There are a set of principles that we've identified that really unite and link participatory budgeting programs that exist across the world. Now, it started in one case. We've identified at least 3,000 municipalities and cities across the world that have adopted this sort of program. So you see about southern Brazil, it first starts there and spreads out across Latin America. Now we can see something about Paris, Madrid, New York, Chicago, Jakarta. There's a whole series of major cities across the world, as well as mid-sized cities such as Vallejo and Greensboro in the United States that also have the process. So the principles around which this is established, first, it's really trying to establish and encourage resident mobilization. It's trying to get more people engaged in community life. In the context of many places in the global south, this is really around trying to create basic foundation principles and ideas around democratization. You're trying to create democracy, right? You're trying to create inner norms and forms of behavior. The way that this is being talked about and being used in more wealthier, more established democracies like the United States is a renewal. There's a sense today that both in Europe and the United States that democratic institutions are not working well. How can we renew the type of institutions in which people engage? And this is developed into a process in which you have, we're trying to get citizens involved in multiple modes. So you encourage resident mobilization with a real emphasis on social inclusion. So it's social inclusion of non-traditional actors. Okay? You're trying to figure out what are the groups that don't vote, what are the groups that really don't have voice. Those are the groups that a lot of participatory budgeting programs have targeted because oftentimes wealthier, upper income individuals have access to city council members, they have access to lobbying groups. So this is a way to try to figure out how can we reach out to those groups that really don't have a voice in the system. Okay? Another part of the participatory budgeting has been a real emphasis on trying to incorporate social justice. And in terms of social justice, we're trying to think about how we spend resources that go to those communities that are underserved. Okay? So in the context, you could imagine in a place like Portland, I lived in Portland about 20 years ago, so some of this may be incorrect called boom development, but a community like communities like the northwest parts of Portland would receive lower sets of resources than in the northeast of Portland and the north part of Portland based on the services that are currently provided. So that there's explicit effort to try to get resources into those areas that are not currently being served by communities. Okay? The process is also designed to promote deliberation. Okay? So deliberation occurs in which citizens begin to exchange ideas about where and how the problems that they face. It's an exchange of information between citizens as well as between citizens and government officials. So it's a multi-level deliberative forum where you begin to look at, here's what really matters to us, here are the issues that are not being addressed. Just to give you an example, so the example I used earlier, the healthcare clinic is a good example that illustrates sort of how there's this ongoing dialogue in which the issues that come to the forefront of the process are then implemented by government. The fourth principle that's really important is this binding decision making. Okay, and as I mentioned at the beginning, and I wanted to come back to this, governments who adhere to these programs, that implement these types of programs, they really are delegating authority to citizens. And this is done within parameters, right? Government says you have $500,000, here's what you can legally do. So you set up the parameters of what is possible, but then when citizens make those decisions, it goes through and those are implemented. And that is a really, really important shift for how citizen participation occurs in the context of environment and law. The last principle that's really important is that these processes institutionalize transparency. So you know how much money is available, you know then who's being contracted, you know that citizens and government officials will watch and have a real sense of how the resources are being spent. The idea then is that this occurs within the participatory budget process, but the hope is that there is a spillover effect. And the spillover effect of where the people, they set up in New York City and a couple of districts, amazingly, one of the main demands among the citizens that voted were improving the quality of bathrooms and installing bathroom stalls in public schools. It turns out there were all these schools in New York City that didn't have basic bathroom stalls, which was, your junior high school, you can imagine what a difficult situation that would be. The city council observed this, and the city council, 2 years later, spent about $40 or $50 million on reforming and remodeling and investing in basic infrastructure around bathrooms in public schools. So that there was one issue that took place within participatory budgeting that has this larger effect beyond program. Okay? So this is sort of the core founding principles around this program work. Okay? This is a slide that for those of you who have looked at participatory budgeting works website or something material that the organizing committee provided. You may be familiar with this slide. The process is it's a very straightforward process, but cities can experiment with different ways of implementing this program, right? There is not a set formula, but it comes down to what are the goals that the community wants to achieve. And they can then move and change the rules in their specific processes to meet those goals. So you can think about, so the first step is a brainstorming of ideas. People bring in ideas, people listen to each other, you begin to have this exchange and this deliberation about what's important. So, for example, in Vallejo, it turns out, Vallejo, California, one of the projects that they selected were scholarships and fellowships for low-income students to go to college. This is sort of beginning to think about how do we want to use public money to try to encourage and benefit the community. There's this process of developing proposals. People come in with ideas, they may be sort of not fully developed, so then you begin to sort of refine the process to figure out what's legal and what's possible. So there's a process in which, as we know, a lot of ideas that people initially have, they can't be first step that's crucial, and there's different voting mechanisms that used. That's something we can talk about over the course of the day, whether you vote by show of hands, whether you vote in a secret ballot, whether you use consensus decision. There's a whole different set of means that you can use in order to establish the vote. And then finally, there's this process of implementation of the voting process. And that's sort of where you begin to have this co-governance relationship between citizens and the government. And government is where you're working together to try to implement the project. Okay? So why do this? We have to think about this is like, so why is it in the interest of a government official to do this? Okay? Let me start with an example of how PBs entered into the United States. Illustrate this. There's an alderman in Chicago, a Democrat running a Democratic every runs in the primary, almost loses the primary.
You lose the Democratic primary in his district, you're
There's an alderman in Chicago.
He barely wins the primary. Why did I almost lose? What can I do different? You lose the Democratic primary. His discretionary funds was about $1 million. He barely was involved in recruiting residents, modernizing citizens. What can I carry out his mandate? You lose the Democratic primary. His discretionary funds was about $1 million. He has helped reinvent himself as a politician, modernizing citizen primary and the election. He carried out his mandate. So the first right discretionary funds was about $1 million, especially elected officials, is received positive effects of reinvent himself as a politician. That knew that people who don't traditionally vote are then more likely to be engaged. So the first right discretionary funds was about $1 million, especially another reason that governments like to do this is it helps reinvent himself as about reason that governments like to do this is disconnect what we think of as co-governance institutions. So you need to have government officials, which is both elected officials and civil servants, as well as residents and community members. Oftentimes, really need to have formal organizations
what
as
we
a
think
partner.
of as
co-governance institutions. Governments, we've
Government,
need to
especially
have
in the United
government
States,
officials
don't have enough
which is both
resources to
elected
run
officials
these
and
programs
civil
because of the
servants,
recruitment, the
as well as
reminders,
residents
and
and
getting
community
people to
members.
attend.
So
it has to be a
partnership.
So the more
really need to have
districts
formal
in Chicago
organizations
what we
as a
think of as
partner. Have had this ongoing
governments
relationship with
government officials
don't have enough
which is
resources to run these programs because of the recruitment,
as
the
well as
reminders,
residents and
it's
getting
vital
people to
to
attend.
have.
So it has to be a
public
administrators or
So the
civil
more really
servants
need to have
who are
districts
interested in
and
organizations
what
as
we
a
think of as
partner.
co-governance.
They're going to sort of
government
run the programs. They have
relationship
with
with
existing
government
cities
officials
don't have enough
which is
resources
elected
to run
officials,
these programs because of the recruitment,
as well as residents.
civil
Getting
servants
vital to
attend.
have.
So it has to be a public administrators or civil servants who are
informal
interested in
organizations
what we think of as co-governance. They're going to sort of run the programs. They have existing cities don't have enough resources to run these programs because of the recruitment, as well as series of meetings are held in spring. So it has to be a public administrators or civil servants who are informal organizations. What we think of as co-governance. They're going to sort of run the programs. They have existing cities don't have enough resources to run these programs because of the recruitment, as well as series of meetings are held in spring. So it has to be a public administrators or civil servants who are informal organizations. What we think of as co-governance. They're going to sort of run the programs. They have existing cities don't have enough resources to run these programs because of the recruitment, as well as series of meetings are held in spring. So it has to be a public administrators or civil servants who are informal organizations. What we think of as co-governance. They're going to sort of run the programs. They have existing cities don't have enough resources to run these programs because of the recruitment, as well as series of meetings are held in spring. So it has to be a public administrators or civil servants who are informal organizations. What we think of as co-governance. They're going to sort of run the programs. They have existing cities don't have enough resources to run these programs because of the recruitment, as well as series of meetings are held in spring. So it has to be a public administrators or civil servants who are informal organizations. What we think of as co-governance. They're going to sort of run the programs. They have enough resources to run these programs because of the recruitment, as well as series of meetings are held in spring. So it has to be a public administrators or civil servants who are informal organizations. What we think of as co-governance. They're going to sort of run the programs. Improve the they have enough resources to run these programs because of the recruitment, as well as series of meetings are held in spring. So it has to be a public administrators or civil servants who are informal organizations. What we think of as co-governance. They're going to sort of run the programs. Improve the they have enough resources to run these programs because of the recruitment, as well as series of meetings are held in spring. So it has to be a public administrators or civil servants who are informal organizations. What we think of as co-governance. They're going to sort of run the programs. They have enough resources to run these programs because of the recruitment, as well as series of meetings are held in spring. So it has to be a public administrators or civil servants who are informal organizations. What we think of as co-governance. They're going to sort of run the programs. They have enough resources to run these programs because of the recruitment, as well as series of meetings are held in spring. So it has to be a public administrators or civil servants who are informal organizations. What we think of as co-governance. They're going to sort of run the programs. They have enough resources to run these programs because of the recruitment, as well as series of meetings are held in spring. So it has to be a public administrators or civil servants who are informal organizations. What we think of as co-governance. They're going to sort of run the programs. They have enough resources to run these programs because of the recruitment, as well as series of meetings are held. This tends to be sort of more progressive or liberal governments that are implementing this, and it's a way to rethink
priorities to spend resources differently. Which is much more common in the United States, is a district-based model has been because mayors haven't been really sort of more progressive or liberal. Mayors have been saying, I'm not so sure about this, implementing this, and it's a way to rethink. Members have been willing to do this. So in Chicago and New York, we have examples of where it started first in one city council member. You begin to see variations. For example, a place like Boston, I'm not so sure about this, implementing this, where a mayor said, okay, we want to do this citywide, but we want to do a youth participatory budget. Examples. And so what they've done in Boston first is in one city council members where they give about $1 million per year, 12 to 15. You begin to see variations. One example of deciding how to allocate and spend. Where a mayor says, okay, we want to do this citywide, but we want to do a youth participatory budget. And so what they've done in Boston first is in one city council members where they give about $1 million per year, 12 to 15. You begin to see variations. One example of deciding how to allocate and spend. Where a mayor says, okay, we want to do this citywide, but we want to do a youth participatory budget. So what they've done in Boston first is in one city council members where they give about $1 million per year, 12 to 15. You begin to see variations. One example of deciding how to allocate and spend. Where a mayor says, okay, we want to do this citywide, but we want to do a youth participatory budget. So what they've done in Boston first is in one city council members where they give about $1 million. So we want to do this citywide, but we want to do a youth participatory. So what they've done in Boston first is in one city council members where they give about $1 million. Had a 20% growth in civil society organizations. So in fact, it is creating new types of organizations. So we want to do this citywide, but we want to do a youth participatory. So what they've done in Boston first is in one city council members where they give about $1 million higher resources on healthcare and growth in civil society. We think that's because they're bringing creating new types of organizations into public forums. So we want to do this citywide, but we want to do a youth participatory. So what they've done in Boston first is in one city council members where they give about $1 million higher resources on healthcare and growth that much more resources. We think that's because they're bringing creating new types of organizations into public forums. So we want to do this citywide, but we want to do a youth participatory. So what they've done in Boston first is in one city council members where they give about $1 million higher resources on change in that much more resources. We think that's because they're bringing new types of organizations into public forums. So we want to do this citywide, but we want to do a youth participatory. So what they've done in Boston first is in one city council members where they give about $1 million higher resources on sales tax. Now, in the context of the global South, the system is much less efficient than it is in the United States and European countries. And so what we think is going on is government or citizens are pressuring to collect more taxes because the governments have created an emphasis on doing and implementing PB projects. And we think governments have the incentive to go out and collect more taxes because they have raised these issues. They have committed to implementing the projects, so you see an effort to try to raise more revenue. United States. Okay, so there's preliminary findings, and there's people here who know the United States. Oh, Jim just says I'm out of time. Let me just go through this really, really quickly. What we see in the context of the United States is occurring. We see that there's a dialogue among individuals, that governments are implementing citizens' decisions. Higher percentage of low-income residents are participating. So, for example, there's one really crucial statistic. 40% of participants in New York City are low-income, and that compares to they are 34% of the total population, and they only vote they're only 29% of the voters. So that this process is key actors who don't normally participate in the political process. Okay. let me just finish with just a sort of a last slide to conclude, to sort of think about, so we sort of see that participatory budgeting has this process of extending and expanding voice and vote to citizens. So what we see, the reason that people continue to participate is they think their time is valued and it matters. I mean, one of the phenomena that we see is that people get tired of engaging in community, especially town hall type meetings, is because they don't feel like their voice is heard. And this is a process where you can actually sort of see, is my voice heard? Is there a connection between my time and government outcomes? We also find in the context of the United States and elsewhere that PB is in fact associated with strengthening communities. We see that there's an increase in the number of participants, especially non-traditional actors. PB programs tend to start very small and grow. The example of Porto Alegre, 1,000 people to then going up to 30,000 participants. What you often see is cities starting off with a pilot that then expands. For those of you who are thinking about this in the context, is oftentimes pilots among small particular neighborhood groups are important. Is much stronger when you have key government champions. So this is an elected official or a sort of who says, we want to invest our resources and our energy into this. When that occurs, you're more likely to get support within the bureaucracies, greater support among community members to actually be able to implement some of these. And the last point that I want to make is that these, going back to this point, sort of the co-governance can work when there is sort of when there's an ongoing relationship between community organizations and government. This doesn't mean that this relationship is conflicts, but it's an understanding that there's a give and take, and that these organizations, the community, are trying to really have a dialogue and trying to figure out a different way of figuring out which policies to do. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your attention. For your attention.
We'll be lowering the light there, but sorry if it gets a little bit dimmer. Thank you, Brian, for introducing budgeting. Our next guest will be so that we can see the depth therein. But it's more than that. Becky Skurlock and Jess Swanich Northwest, but they brought it to the youth. Youth Voice, Youth Choice is the name of the Seattle Youth PB process. Youth Commission. She oversaw the design and addressing youth health. Youth also started and led Youth Powerhouse, a social action organization for youth. Jess, too, while serving on the commission, helped implement projects using a participatory budgeting process on Seattle's education and participatory budgeting committees, and helped consult school districts, the Department of Equity and Racial Relations. He would go on to consult the PB process for adults as well, because that's really what youth participatory budgeting represents. It's youth around the United States that are modeling PB processes and adults. So I want to welcome and thank Jess and Becky.
Thank you very much for the introduction. That was very nice. And Brian, it was fascinating to hear kind of participatory budgeting. And thank you all for being here. We're really excited to talk about our experience working with on the level of Seattle and specifically focus on youth. And I are also former Seattle Youth Commission. And this is essentially an official city commission in which 15 youth were the city to represent the voices and the experiences of the youth in our districts. So we worked on projects such as houselessness and improving the quality of our schools are important to youth in conjunction with the City Council. And Olive already introduced us, but I am on a gap year before the University of Chicago. I'm interested in political science and economics. And Jess is a sophomore at Seattle University, currently double majoring in public affairs and political science. So a little bit about the Youth Voice. It was launched by the Department of Neighborhoods in July 2015. It aimed to engage students ages 11 to 25, so a pretty broad, who decide how to spend $700,000 of the city's budget. This kind of seems like a very small amount in the context of the city as a whole, but on the context of what projects youth are interested in and they want to do, this can actually have a big impact. So it was the second participatory budgeting program ever that was totally after Boston. And we, Jess and I, were the two youth delegates on the steering committee. So it was 20 people total, but we were the young people providing the youth perspective and how the program was developed.
So kind of going into influence in Seattle, we looked at Boston. So the mayor's youth $1 million for the public funds for the different projects. So in 2013, it started as Youth Lead the Change. I think that was really important for us in Seattle to kind of have that youth-focused initiative with. As in the model, Youth Lead the Change. When we first started, we were Youth Voice, Youth Choice. My name is Your Voice, Your Choice, to make it more inclusive for the different communities. So with that kind of change, it also came to pop-up discussions in public spaces. So what that kind of looked like was open discussions in different market squares. So with that kind of change, it also came to pop-up that Boston is very known for. So what that back in the 1790s, open discussions in different kind of bringing it to schools and different types of areas to kind of allow for more youth participation. Boston is very known, be more engaged with the youth in your community, and what does it mean to take an active step? Kind of bringing it to schools, into the communities, different types of areas to kind of allow for more youth. So with that, over 2,000 Bostonian youth, ages 12 to 25, took a stance, kind of representing what they wanted for Boston to kind of use the money to appropriate funds for in terms of the different projects that 12 to 25 took a stance and kind of for Boston to kind of. So now we're looking at Phoenix. Phoenix implemented the process with high school, and I think that's very important considering that high school students right now are kind of like the game. We're looking at Phoenix, college, Phoenix, and once you're in college, you have a lot of time important considering that sit and settle on a major and the focus that you want to go in terms of a pathway for and once you're in college, you have a lot of any high school students within the Phoenix high school major and judge the focus that you want to go feasibility and necessity. So once you're in college, you have sustainable projects that can be any high school students within the Phoenix gone over time. What does it mean if feasibility and necessity right now? And sustainable projects that can be continued towards the future. So that was something that was very important. Also considering the fact that education and factors when considering participatory budgeting. So that was something that was in the youth perspective. Also considering the fact that representation, there are different when considering participatory budgeting. And also those from different religious faiths. How are they being active representation? They're historically been not kind of given that platform for them to those from different religious faiths. So understanding how are they being active representation, power for them to kind of go out into their communities and say what's on their mind. Platform for them those from different religious faiths. So understanding how are they being active representation, power for them to kind of go out into their communities.
Process. It went through much the same process as any participatory budgeting program. Community members brainstorm ideas for potential projects, and this was actually open to anyone. Process as any submit ideas through an online form. We also had members brainstorm ideas that we passed out and then collected. And then we had a online form youth budget delegates, and these students were between the ages of 11 and 25, and they took all of these and turned them into 19 concrete project proposals with only the assistance of one or two adult leaders. The project because they had to kind of take a very disparate project proposals with only the assistance of one or two ideas of what citizens project them into proposals that were within the budget that could act with only the assistance of one or two. From there was the vote, and we actually did hang up voting booths in our schools and there was and we invited young people ages 11 to 25 hang up voting booths that they most wanted to see in their communities, and we invited young people projects that were finally implemented, and then the city and staff worked to carry out projects that were finally implemented.
So, kind of going into our role, this was the kind of spread out within our schools. So we helped plan the project like from its inception all the way to kind of going out there, going into our actively taking part and trying to reel people in to actually have a voice. So we helped plan the project like from its inception. So like Becky mentioned, we set up voting booths, and with that, it was different and people in to actually have a voice. The fact that we had paper forms at the time, so the way that we would do it was we would go to and tell students about this way to be more engaged with the paper forms at the process of government. So the way that we would do it was usually, like in terms of government processes, you have to be 18 to vote. But we kind of spun it in this way to say that if you were between the ages of 11 and 25, usually, like in terms of government processes, you have to be 18 to vote. But we kind of spun it in this way to say that if you were between the ages of 11 and 25, usually, like in terms of government processes, you have to be 18 to vote. But we kind of spun it in this way to say that if you were between the ages of 11 and 25, usually, like in terms of government processes, you have to be 18 to vote. But we kind of spun it in this way to say that if you were between the ages of 11 and 25, usually, like in terms of government processes, you have to be 18 to vote. But we kind of spun it in this way to say that if you were between the ages of 11 and 25, usually, like in terms of government processes, you have to be 18 to vote. But we kind of spun it in this way to say that if you were between the ages of 11 and 25, usually, like in terms of government processes, you have to be 18 to vote. But we kind of spun it in this way to say that if you were between the ages of 11 and 25, usually, like in terms of government processes, you have to be 18 to vote. But we kind of spun it in this way to say that if you were between the ages of 11 and 25, usually, like in terms of government processes, you have to be 18 to vote. But we kind of spun it in this way to say that.
There was one program that was implemented to involve youth in building 10 small mobile homes. So, program that was implemented homeless shelter improvements project that went into improving the homes. Shelters. There were job readiness workers project that we were able to fund, and also a program in schools that would enable staff to better reach out to homeless youth and connect them also a program the resources in the local community they might not otherwise have access to reach out and so those were the four primary also the resources in the several projects throughout the community, including a Wi-Fi, which is a program that was already at our local library. Several projects throughout youth recognize the importance of this, the importance of having internet access, which is a program that was already connecting with friends for pretty much everything in the modern era. So they voted to explore There were also park bathroom updates that they wanted to see, and they wanted to repaint the crosswalks to make sure that there were safe routes to access. They wanted to repaint the crosswalks. And in total, this came to $700,000. I believe there was a $250,000 limit on any one individual project. And in total, this came to $700,000.
So looking at the whole process of when it started to actually, you looked at what worked. So these are the three things that really stood out for us: the budget delegates, strong voter turnout, and civic engagement. The budget delegates, as I mentioned earlier, it was really three things that really stood out for us, delegates, in order to understand the feasibility and civility of the budget delegates. As I mentioned earlier, there were some things that were from the rest, but of course we kind of had to be grounded in our idea and approach of what can be. As I mentioned earlier, there were some things that we have an impact on the communities, but of course we kind of had to. Also, the strong voter turnout, grounded in our idea and approach of considering. As I mentioned earlier, there were some things that we have an impact on the community. More involved with youth from ages 11 to 25 voter turnout time. Our idea and approach of that really gave like a stepping stone for the more involved with youth. I guess you could 25 voter turnout time. Politically, what that meant for them to stone different council members and different community organizers within also civic engagement. So it wasn't only focused primarily in the schools, but community organizations. So kind of having it all intertwined, and especially it's really
city election and decisions about how demonstrates to youth that they can be, the city does care about what they think, even though they're meeting their needs. I wish these empowering social justice projects were more widely discussed within the Seattle City Council and in state policies, and to me, are thinking already on the broader level. They're thinking about how these projects and these ideas that they have can be implemented, not just on a level of the participatory budgeting program, but also in the as Brian was talking about the bathroom upgrades. That's just one example of a small project that started with an idea from youth and then expanded into a city initiative that addressed a real need that hadn't been recognized before. So that is another really important aspect of the process.
At the four things that stood out for us again, and where can we improve? Engagement, It was just me and Becky as the youth representatives that aren't being listened to. Engaging with those communities. What does it mean to go out into the community and like advocate for them and doing what you think is best? Two different modes of representation. There's a trustee model, and there's a delegate model. So with that trustee model, you are doing what you think is best for the community. Model, you are actually going to the community, getting feedback, hearing from the voices that aren't being historically listened to. So understanding a good balance, what does it mean to be a trustee and what does it mean to be a delegate, and understanding those two with the community. With communication, updates and progress, that was a big thing moving forward. The projects got approved. There wasn't much communication afterwards what youth can do to kind of support these projects. In addition, it's also important to have voices heard. So what does it mean to have these types of meetings but not having the right people show up? In this case, looking at participation, like having meetings in the evening. Is that being accessible for parents that really want to get involved and want to? What does it mean to actually carry out a project that you think will be sustainable over time? And what is it for the children like moving forward? Can it be done by youth in the next year, in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years? Understanding those at the same time. Like I mentioned earlier, people of color, people with disabilities, and people of different religious faiths, how are they being accurately represented and how are they being accurately heard? In terms of being efficient, engage with them without being different types of mirrors in terms of what they want. Prioritizing our own voices over theirs, or are we taking an active effort to make sure that everyone's voice is listened to? So that's one of the things that we would like to improve on moving forward in terms of actively engaging with the youth and different communities moving forward.
So in the future, the program has been renamed Choice, and we'll hear from the next speaker about that. And now it's expanded to all of the city, and it has more of a focus on the parks and streets and improvements that need to be made. But young people are still involved. The Seattle Youth is still involved in getting youth engaged in this process and in getting their ideas in creating the projects that are funded by the Your Voice, Your Choice program. And so I hope what you take away from this presentation is that people are the leaders of today. We're not just leaders of tomorrow. And by engaging in a participatory youth, the cities are giving youth the opportunity to really participate and become lifelong leaders in civic engagement. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy and Jess. That was awesome. And Brian. This morning when I was meant to me, I forgot some very important things. Is that when you have the mic today, slow, especially when you're introducing yourself, because we have a couple hardworking that are helping translate this to for non-English speakers. That is important. That we were actually going to do a little exercise. We were also a little Dynamica. We're familiar with Dynamicas here in East Portland. They're common practice. So I want to ask Amanda Hudson to come up and to lead us in just maybe getting to know each other, stretching a little bit. You've been sitting here a little while, so thank you, Amanda.
Hello, everybody. Could you guys do me a favor and stand up? Take a second and say hi to each other, and we're going to do this by take somebody's hand, but here's the catch. You cannot let go of that hand. Somebody else's hand. Okay? So. We can model it. Yes. No, I do. Okay, I'm starting to see everybody's looking untangled. All right, I have a couple more questions for you guys.
And then I think it's like, yeah, and then we have to.
Okay, clap once if you hear me. Clap once if you hear me. Clap twice if you hear me. Clap 3 times if you hear me. We're all back. Okay. I have a couple more, just a way for us to hear and see who in the room. This is called human bingo. So we're all familiar with the concept. If you win bingo, what do you shout? Okay, I think you guys, I didn't hear that. If you win, what do you shout? Okay, so I'm going to ask some questions, and if your answer is yes, okay. All right, who here in the room is, okay, who here in the room is originally from Oregon? Washington? California? Somewhere else in the U.S.? Somewhere else in the world? Okay. All right, before this event, when you first started, was this your first time hearing about PB? Okay, lots of bingos. Okay, if you are in this room and you are an elected official or okay, a government employee? You work in the nonprofit sector? Any students? Anybody from the neighborhood associations? Any community member? Awesome. So we're talking breaking into groups later. So if you're interested, think right now. If you're interested in PB youth. Okay. Equity and PB. Transportation. Public safety, criminal justice reform. Parks and green spaces? Housing? And the neighborhood level PB? Okay. Who here is ready to hear from some more speakers? Okay, all right, thanks everybody.
All right, so our next speaker, and a group of us went down to a conference in Phoenix on participatory democracy. We actually got to hear our next speaker speak what she had to say there, so we knew we had to have her here. Our next speaker is Amy Wen. She's manager for participatory budgeting program, Your Voice, Your Choice, Parks and Streets at the Seattle Department of Neighborhoods. Experience in policy analysis, nonprofit management in City, New Orleans, and Seattle. Department of Neighborhoods. Amy served as a legislative aide for the City of Seattle council member, where she advised on policy related to planning, land use, parks, utilities, immigration. I'm remembering to speak slower. Prior to her time at City Hall, Amy worked as the program manager for APACE, Asian Pacific Islander Americans of civic impact, and was responsible for developing program access, electoral participation, engagement in diverse AAPI communities. Amy has also worked giving free legal on a free legal hotline for the Louisiana Civic, as a project manager for the Emmy Award-winning documentary Herman's House. Amy received her degree in a master's degree in urban and an undergraduate degree in urban studies from the New School in New York. She loves hand-pulled noodles, Octavia Butler, videos of red pandas, place in space, pretending to be Salvador Dali, making pasta, ginkgo leaves, and fantasizing about open mics. So here's Amy coming to the mic now.
It's true, I do love all of those things. All right. And I drop things, clearly. All right, well, thank you so much for allowing me to address you today. And thank you to Jim and all the organizers and the fantastic speakers that I get to be here with today. Elephant in the room right away. What were you thinking, Seattle? Why aren't you still Youth Voice, Youth Choice? Am I right? Can we have another applause for Becky and Jess? And it's that question, right? Like, what is the evolution from Youth Voice, Youth Choice to, yes, we're very clever, Your Voice, Your Choice? It's actually something that is entirely unsatisfactory. It comes down to very bureaucratic reasoning, and it comes down to funding. So kind of on that note, what I'm going to be offering you today is really the implementer, the practitioner perspective. And then kind of building that I'm going to leave the political will and the kind of buy-in to Speaker Jamal. To get this started, so the City of Seattle's Participatory Budgeting Initiative is currently Your Voice, Your Choice, Parks and Streets. This is the, wow, that font is so small. I also just have to tell you guys, we are required at the City of Seattle to use a text called Seattle Text. It doesn't seem to work on any other. I just feel like I should have just scrapped the whole Seattle text. But so I will do my best to read what is there so that you can see it a little bit better. We'll hear it a little bit better. So Your Voice, Your Choice is a participatory budgeting initiative in which anyone who lives, works, goes to school, receives services in the city of Seattle participate. We are currently a $3 million program for 2018. So just to kind of emphasize the who can participate, we wanted to recognize that experiencing folks outside of city limits. So it was very important for us to emphasize that you don't have to have ties and commitments to transforming this city for the better. Where you live, work, go to school, receive services is our line. This is the third year of the Parks and Streets focus, the second year of the Parks and Streets focus. All right, and just for context, and it was kind of hit on a bit, what makes Seattle very interesting in terms of a US approach to participatory budgeting is we're actually housed within the executive. So I work for the Department of Neighborhoods, your voice, your choice. Now, as you heard, we oftentimes in a US context refer to New York, as New York is the largest participatory budgeting program. Now, when you have a system that is driven by elected officials, you also see that it's can be rather uneven. You have folks that actually get elected upon this. So one of the really strong pros in a Seattle approach being housed within, driven from a department, housed within the executive, is we really look at the city as a whole in our design, in our strategy. I love the Department of Neighborhood. There's some Portland neighborhood staff in the room as well. Can I get a hands? Awesome, you guys do fantastic work. We're gonna talk. So one of the kind of core tenets of DON is really and more than outreach and engagement, it is equity as our guide. So I have so much City of Seattle pride. We have been a leader for quite a while in, as a city, our race and social justice initiative, which is really mandated across our entire city. So this is really the structure and context in which we've developed and designed this program, is leading with equity, leading with race, right? Which is to call out and name that we need to center communities of color within this work. And so I'm not gonna get too much into the history, as we heard a fantastic presentation about youth voice, youth choice. A big thing to kind of point out is $700,000. Our second year, $2 million, we're in a $3 million period, and we hope that our numbers and metrics will make the case that we can grow and see this become something more than it currently is. All right. Just a look back at 2017, the first year of Your Voice, Your Choice, and I also have a full report that I will put at the front table if you're interested in kind of learning more about our numbers. This is a very small map of the city of Seattle. Here we have 7 city council districts. And so this is our kind of map of participation by district. As a whole, we collected 894 ideas. This was collected in person at events. And you know, one thing to note about this here, and I'll kind of bring this up too, just because I want you to frame this entire presentation within the context that participatory budgeting is a brilliant tool, but if we don't have a goal, which is to ultimately direct resources to communities of color and other under-resourced communities, right? So I'll be frank, that 894 ideas submitted, and you'll see this in our report, predominantly white folks, and online participation is dominated by white women of varying ages, right? And you'll find in our in-person submissions and paper submissions where we targeted events to community-based organizations, nonprofit service providers, is where we have more engagement with communities of color. And then our last members in terms of project development, which is kind of a departure from Youth Voice, Youth Choice, where there are budget delegates. We don't have budget delegates in Your Voice, Your Choice. Anybody can come to meetings, and they help to actually prioritize the ideas that were submitted. 263 unique participants in that process that had about 28 meetings across the city. These are 2-hour meetings. And then to the voting phase, where we had a little under 8,000 folks voting, and this is also online and in person. And that ended in funding 33 projects. And again, this is park and street improvements. And so just some key takeaways, and I'm going to key this up as a way to really direct the conversation into where we are now and what does it mean for us to be a program that is for everyone, right? And that's that word, we are for everyone, but what does it look like in terms of our outcomes and metrics? And how do we, again, direct resources to areas and that haven't traditionally, historically received resources and investment? So, okay, just very straightforward, we had 2 million. We have a district system, we actually divided that 2 million equally across the districts. So each district got $285,000 for park and street improvements. Now, I think we all know that diagram of the fence, you know, with the box standing at different levels. I did not include that. I think that's a PowerPoint cliche. But just right. So after we made this decision, as you can imagine, in the response to communities is, that's not equity. That's that 90s equality stuff, right? That doesn't make sense. We know that areas have different levels of investment. And we knew moving into 2018 that that was unacceptable. We cannot, again, start our structure by dividing equally, right? But what we did do last year was outreach within districts 1, 2, and 5, where are actually higher levels of communities of color. So we did do more outreach. The other thing is, you know, this is kind of the setup for it. I wish that I could say as practitioners and as government employees, we had more time to do it. We never have enough time to implement these programs, and there's so much administrative need. I should have also said that we're a program staff of 2. I have one other colleague, so there are 2 people, and this is only half of my job. So if you just think about that, 1.5 staff members to do everything is kind of insane. Burnout is real. Yeah, let me just mull over that one for a moment. All right, so yes, we're here on a Saturday also, so let's get this energy up, you know? Participatory budgeting, it has to be fun. If there are future people in this room that are going to be participatory budgeting practitioners, anybody who does this work will tell you have to find the light in it because it will destroy you if you do not. Because this is hard work. All right, so that was 2017, and moving into 2018, designing this program, some of the core questions that me and my colleague Craig thought about is, how do we structure a program serving emphasizing participation for all, but centering communities of color? How should funding be distributed among and within 7 city council districts? How do we engage current advocates while encouraging new participation? Now, I wish I could say I know the answers to this, but the answer to these 3 questions does not come from government employees. It comes from people. It comes from people who are living the experience that then tell us what to do. So how do we go about getting at these questions answered? Oh, cities love steering committees, am I right? Sometimes we call it committees, sometimes we call it advisory boards, We love steering committees. Now, I will tell you this. I personally dislike steering, but I actually have power. Like, those were, we decided to do something rather radical with our very small budget. We said, we're going to compensate our steering committee, and we're going to do more than just do some little stipend. We're going to compensate our steering committee members like they deserve to for their time and expertise. What that means is we compensate our steering committee members $50 an hour. We compensate them $50 an hour because, yes, pay people, always pay people. We do that because another component of our program is we compensate community liaisons, which help us do our work in language that come from the communities that we want to serve. And we also, as a market standard, compensate them $50 an hour. That's a program that's administered through the Department of Neighborhoods. And what happens about an application where you actually compensate the people? We have 10 steering of color. We have an entirely people. We have one fantastic and see their full body. One woman who is Native, a veteran. She applied because nobody knows parks and streets better than she does. She has to live in them. She knows them. And she does voices that we have telling. We got you, but I'm so glad that you did it. Okay, so we have this so much powerful voices. How are we going to leverage power? So this goes back to that funding piece. $2 million program that we divided equally across the 7 districts. We knew that additional $1 million could not be distributed equally again. The steering committee is deciding how that additional $1 million is going to be spent. That is their, we're listening to them. The other piece of the steering committee is doing, apart from that decision of how funding is going to be distributed and allocated, is they are advising us on all of the programmatic phases. So that's our outreach and engagement plan, and making key recommendations to be implemented in our 2019 cycle. Co-facilitated a project development meeting in the neighborhood that they felt most connected to. And just to refresh you, our project development meetings are the 2-hour meetings that happen across the city. And this year we had 32 of them in 5 weeks. Again, that's 2 staff. We all have to be there. Yes, I had 16 meetings in 5 weeks. That's crazy. All right. So, yeah, that's more on the, that's other interventions that we make going into 2018, knowing that we have to do better as practitioners. We really focused on building new partnerships. One of the key tenets of neighborhoods, and we always say this, is we have to meet people where they're at. And that means looking at who we're working with, who our partners are. And, you know, this goes back to that, that question of how do we have a program for all, but centering communities of color. So we created and established new partnerships with nonprofits, community-based organizations, hosted meetings there on site within their programming. You know, we put more of our budget in all of our program phases limited English proficiency, so we expanded our in-language to 5 languages. We're in Spanish, Vietnamese, Chinese, traditional Chinese, Arabic, and Somali. And we also use liaisons to do that engagement in person. For idea collection, we did online idea collection in Spanish and English, and then we had those 5 languages available in paper form. For the first time ever, we actually did our project development, which is again those 2-hour engagement meetings in English, Spanish, and Arabic, which was really cool. It is awesome that we can say. And so we collaborate with the Seattle Public Library, Seattle Public Schools, City Council, but again, I think the biggest thing was we collaborate with moving us Public Library, going to the places like City Council, working with our Seattle Housing Authority, working with housing providers to have these meetings about moving our public library, going in areas where folks don't places like they have a voice, working with our Seattle Housing Authority. All right, and the last point that I'm going to bring into what kind of design, when we were redesigning, what really came to the forefront. And again, we hear this from bring into tired of telling you guys the same thing. We tell you all the time that you need to do better. You guys have the data. Why don't you use it? And again, we hear this from it. We wanted to lead with data, and we have some fantastic studies the City of Seattle and our different departments have done. What you see to the right, this is our access to data, and we have some planning and community development the City of Seattle created. So what you're seeing is the red zones have the right. This is obviously, and the lighter colors have higher planning and community. Really correlating everything from graduation rates, class rates, and so this is one of those like we know where we need to emphasize and do our everything from graduation rates, class rates. I wanted to kind of Vanna White. This is one of those like we know. All right, and then the map to the left is actually taken from our Office of Sustainability and Environment. Now, we are emphasis participatory budgeting, and we knew that you can't talk about sustainability without thinking about how infrastructure must be couched within a larger emphasis of participatory budgeting. But and we also know that the environmental discourse is very much dominated by a white voice. Our Office of Sustainability and Environment has done fantastic work in launching an equity and environment initiative that is led by companies of color. So to build off of that work and apply their analysis to our program. Fantastic work in all right. So it's a little bit confusing. The purple is actually the quartile analysis to our program. Needs more attention. All right, it's a little bit confusing. The early results. So what I can share from you for 2018, we launched January 2nd of this year, and we had a total of 1,421 ideas. So we have for 2018, we launched January 2nd, about 100 more ideas for target street improvements. That moved 21 ideas development, which we conducted from February 23rd to March 28th, which consisted of 30 meetings where we had 562 participants, 515 which we conducted. So we doubled our numbers to March 20. We're pretty proud of that. Consisted of 30. All right, and I'm just going to share really quickly the 62 participant results that we've had thus far just this year. This is one that we're really proud of. We're pretty proud of that. We've had over 70% and I'm just going to share really quickly the 62 participants in the idea collection phase just this year. This is one that we're really proud of. This is the idea collection demographic. And I'm just going to share really quickly the 62 participants. One thing to know is that, you know, traditionally, historically, we always have the highest kind of participation from to 50 and above. Actually saw growth within this 25 to 30 that we're actually pretty excited about. Traditionally, historically, we always have the highest kind of participation. This is the one that we are. Actually saw growth within this 25 to 30 this is one of those, you know, I think that we can maybe in the equity conversation have this further. And this is Seattle and Portland. We both know this. We have a housing crisis. We have a homelessness crisis. Maybe in the equity conversation have this further. And it's racialized, right? Seattle and Portland. As you can see, we had 80% participation from maybe in the equity conversation that was predominantly online. Our in-person engagement, which is more targeted to communities of color, is where we have more participation. We had 80% participation from maybe in the equity. This is actually better than last year. Our in-person engagement, which is more targeted to communities of color, is where we have more participation. So, all right, project development, our in-person statistics. Again, we had over 60% of new folks coming to the program, which we're very excited about. So, all right, project development, age demographic statistics are pretty similar into idea collection. It's a lot of time commitment to ask folks to come for 2 hours, and I can have a long conversation about how we can try to pretty simple obstacles and yield the answers. Please idea collection. It's a lot of time commitment to ask folks to come for 2 hours, and I can have a long conversation about how we can try to obstacles and yield the answers. Idea collection. Me, I am 2 hours, and I can have my colleague conversation program coordinator. End with anything and leave you with anything is that, and I can have my colleague conversation program as. That means that it is upon us to constantly improve our processes. Program is still in its infancy. We're literally in our second year, and we have put an emphasis on collecting data and metrics to make data-driven decisions, but also putting people in positions of power so that we remain accountable to communities of color. So because we have an amazing steering committee that will tell us what to do, but also we have to do stuff as well. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. And after this, so there'll be a chance to hear more from our speakers. Next is the Honorable Jamal T Fox. Jamal was born in Fredericksburg, in Greensboro, North Carolina. He received his bachelor's degree from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University and a master's degree in public administration from University. In 2013, years for the city manager in the city of Greensboro, Jamal was first elected to the Greensboro City Council in District 2 as the youngest ever elected official in Greensboro, North Carolina. In 2015, he was re-elected to the Greensboro City Council and served through 2017. He's also a former North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University Science adjunct professor, and a social studies and leadership teacher at schools. He's also a community advocate, a youth mentor, and and has been a political leader in North Carolina. We are now fortunate to have Jamal in Portland. He moved here, I think, last August, a Portlander, and now he's currently serving as a property and business development manager for Portland Parks and Recreation. And he also serves on the Oregon Commission on Black Affairs. Welcome, Jamal.
Let's do that again, because I don't feel the energy. Good morning. Good morning. That's the Portland spirit. Well, thank you, Jim, and Healthy Democracy, the panel. Thank you all for allowing me the honor to be with you today, talk about a great across the nation and in many communities, participatory budgeting. You'll continue to see this. Of us will continue to put it out there, but one of the things through the lens today as a former elected official, as well as a social studies and teen leadership teacher at the high school level. One of the things that I also want to share with you before I get started is I want to give you just Greensboro in general, give you a little context before I get into this presentation. Greensboro is a city of 300,000 individuals. We're a district-based system where we have 5 city elected districts. We have 3 mayor at large. It's called the 5-3-1 system. One of the things that we looked at over 5-6 years ago was how do we get in the greater community at large more involved of how we spend dollars. One of the things that we heard continuously, you're not investing in my community. And as elected officials, the first thing we say, well, let me show you this chart. Let me show you where the investment is, right? The community said, no, it's not about equality. It's about work and where you invest those dollars. And so we had to take a real hard look at Greensboro. So the community, and they packed our city council chambers month after month, week after week. We had 2 meetings a month on the first and third Tuesday of every month, and it was packed. The community table. Many of us who formed before I was elected in 2013, teaching this to my college students about involved. And one of the things I always stated when I do presentations, that's democracy. And so talking about that in that context, a lot of people got really, but we had to think about what we're going to do. Real decisions, real money, real power. What do we do from here? One of the things after we got elected, we got a call from President Obama, and myself and another colleague had to go to the White House with a lot of leaders to talk about participatory budgeting, what we're doing in our communities to make sure that we have people. From that, we went back to the community. We said, hey, we need to do this. We need people at the table. One of the hard things for elected officials is to give up power. And one of the things that we had to do is really take a hard look. Do we really want people to get involved in our public process? And we did. So to start this out, we had to look at our budget. We had a $534 million budget in the city of Greenville. We were trying to push, and I was one of the members, said, hey, let's do 5% of our budget. That didn't. We couldn't get majority of us on council to agree to 5%. Then we said, well, let's do 1%. Well, we couldn't get a lot of people to agree to 1%. So we said, hey, let's do $500,000, $100,000 each. And that was an idea that came from our city manager at the time. And so we started out with $1,000 per district. And that helped. But we worked out with the participatory budgeting project nationally to have them come into our community and craft what we can use in our community. And it cost us about $200,000 to craft the different things that I'm going to share with you today. Through this, we were able to develop people in the community, new leaders in the process that felt like government really didn't care about them. And so we were able to bring them in the process, and we ended up through PB hiring 2 local community residents to lead us and lead PB in Greensboro. Greensboro had 4 different goals. The first goal was equity, empowerment, community building, and transparency. And so the timeline that you see from we started the process late 2015, and all the way through voting through 2016. One of the things to get us through this process, we said, okay, we have $100,000 per district. How are we going to divvy up the projects? How are we going to develop the ideas? How are we going to reach out to the community? Well, I will tell you, we had 80 PB events throughout our community. Each council member were able to select 2 members each. You see 18 members up there, so all 9 of us got to select 2 people from the community to represent our district, and at-large members, because they were at large, they were able to all districts. And these individuals were the initial steering committee that helped us create and draft what our PB process was. And through this process, we had 80 PB events, 100 surveys that we actually did. What we found in North Carolina, our regular voting process for elected officials, whether at the city, county, or school board, normally only got us about maybe 5 to 7% people who voted. And good elections, maybe 11 to 13%. But what we found out in this PB process, we had more people that got involved in the process because they wanted to know how we were spending their tax dollars in their communities, where were our priorities, and did the city council's priority align with the community's priorities. So that steering committee that I shared with you, those 18 individuals, they created a handbook. And handbook, I don't have many copies, but I'm going to share with you a link that you can look at. Within that handbook, they created roles and responsibilities, how we're going to do the voting, locations where we're going to have the voting. We had expos in every community center, in every community. We went to churches. We tried to meet people where they were. And at the end of the day, we started with, well, we'll have people as young as 11 years old vote in the process. Well, that caused a little controversy on council, and a lot of people disagreed. Well, someone that's 11 years old, still learning, they shouldn't be part of the process, and we end up negotiating to limit it to 14 years of age and over. And part of the process, you see proof of residency, government IDs, green cards, student IDs, bills, bank statements, because you had to vote. I couldn't be in District 2 and come over into District 3 and vote, which was around the downtown portion. It wasn't allowed. We had volunteers that helped us. We had many volunteers, and many of those volunteers became the budget delegates that helped us take the ideas in and craft what the proposals were going to be. And so from September 2015 to May, we had 1,100 residents that voted, 50 volunteer budget delegates, and more than 50 community outreach created throughout this period of time. Winning projects. And a lot of those projects, murals on the buildings, to some sidewalks in their communities, to park benches, to one of the most projects were chessboards that cost about $50,000. One selected that they wanted, and we went back and forth on $50,000 to be able to get that chessboard. And so moving forward, our steering committee evaluation, there were some great evaluations that came from our steering committee, and I'm going to share with you what were stated. PB allowed a different type of person an equal opportunity to participate for a change. What was so great was not only my ideas, but all the other ideas. It was good to see other people involved at the table. This is such an important process that has huge potential to get folks feeling more connected and one another, and potentially a bigger opportunity for authentic citizen. And the staff person that actually helped our budget this process, and they actually develop a deeper understanding of the budget that goes into what staff does. My favorite part was seeing people get injected into the city process. Most of the times when we talked about budget and go into when we had district budget meetings, you know how many people would come to those budget meetings? Maybe 3, maybe 5. And we always wonder, well, what are we doing wrong where we can't get constituency to come out to learn about the process? Well, advocacy. We was not reaching them where they are. We wasn't going into the churches. We wasn't doing what we needed to do. We thought that we can craft a press release. We could put it on Facebook and Twitter, and that's it. That's all we had to do. Met the public announcement rules. No, we had to do more. And one of the things that we develop in this process, and I'm going to share with you very shortly, is you have to create a simulator. Understand how much is your city's budget. Ask them to go in and figure out how do you balance a budget. A lot of times, particularly in communities of color, they don't know anything about budgets. A lot of us don't. We don't know how they're spent. What is general funding? What are some other funds that your community has? Are those funds being adequately addressed across the community and some communities? And that's some of the things that we talked about. And we had UNCG who did the evaluation for us in Greensboro, and they were huge advocates. We saw that students at the college level were really enthused and excited because it was felt like they mattered and they cared in their community. Because they said, hey, you guys are spending telling us what you're going to do with it. That's not fair. We need to be involved throughout the process, and we need to tell you, communities, you don't live here. You can't come over and say, well, we gave you sidewalks this year. What more do you want? Well, we want more because too long in Greensboro, a lot of communities were cast away, put to a side, and they felt like they didn't matter or didn't care. So one of the recommendations that came is how do we do things differently? How do we change the process up where it's more fair? And so adjusting, clarifying the roles and responsibility, the budget delegates, what is your role? Committee, what is your role? Officials, what is your role? How are we going to set up voting? Sometimes the voting was at the community centers throughout Greensboro, and it was electronic voting. So we had computers there so you can come in and you can vote. And then we also had paper forms. And we extended the time to give people an opportunity to come out and vote. A lot of times it's hardworking people, and their hours, sometimes third shift. So we had to be flexible on the weekends, after night, to be able to get an opportunity to come out and vote and tell us how they want their tax dollars to be spent. So we changed up our process before I left Greensboro. So now the process improvements we looked at between that January, March period of time, and then we collected the ideas between April and May. We start the vetting process after that period of time through September. The community expos opportunity to really talk about PB, to educate people, to understand what PB is. And a lot of times, the elected officials, so we fully understand exactly our role and how we can participate. And then we actually had the voting process. One of the things that I'm going to share is looking at the demographics of the 2,000 people that were involved in Cycle 1, 85% of those individuals were new to the process, had no city budgeting, and were never really involved. We saw were 18 to 24-year-olds and 25 to 44-year-olds were really the area respondents that we got response from. It's like regular elections. Well, in this process, it's no different. More women voted in PB. The time that we had more men involved in the process was as a budget delegate, helping craft and pull together the ideas. When we start looking at education, graduate degrees and higher were the education levels. The annual household income were between $10,000 and $74,000 were the respondents that replied. And we had a majority of minority communities that were involved. 4% of the respondents were white, and everything else were different from Asian, Black, African American, Latino. Interesting enough, when you start looking at Greensboro's demographics as a whole, it's 51% white, and it's 48% minority, 42% black. So when we start looking at these demographics, it was very interesting, and the response responded, where they responded, but it was exciting for us when we went through this process. If you click this second one, city council districts. So, yeah, second one. So with the city council districts, I was a city council member. I represented 60,000 people, and I represented District 2. The districts was give or take plus or minus 5,000, so it was each district was about 60,000 residents that you represented. And when you actually went through the budget simulator, it asks you which districts. And so District 2, the district that I represented, which is the second largest district in Greensboro, but when you went through the budget simulator, everything you did, all 800 surveys, it asked you to put your district and other demographic information that we need so we can see who's responding to us. If you click on the simulator. So PB was one process for us, okay? Another process was, okay, we go to PB, get you involved, but do you know anything about our budget? Where are our funds? Where do they go? Follow the money. I always tell people that. So in this process, right now, it started out balanced. If you scroll down some, but you're able to click. Can you click on public safety and so I'm not advocating that we this is just the first one that I went to. Let's scroll down. Let me get out of public safety. I don't want to start with general government. Let's take general government up some. And so you see up here, you have a surplus of $3.1 million. But the idea is for you to balance the budget, and what you do is, in these buckets, you can either take it up or you can take it down. And after this, you submit it. There's a survey information, and in that information, you will let us know these are your priorities to our budget office, and our budget office will put together all this information for city council. So when it's time for us, we understand where the community is coming from. Us from going into the community, every budget section that we have, take this simulator out, and we normally get you to take your phones out, Balancing Act Greensboro, and we could do a live budget session right now. But I didn't want to do that today. But that's something that you can do. But that's PB that we had to create on the front end and back end so you can understand how the process worked. Another leg, if you go to the next slide. Real money, real power. So, as I conclude, the budget simulator is something awesome to have. If your communities don't, this is an area that you can advocate, for your city to create. The PB process is hugely important to make sure that you have the right for you at the table to be able to get involved and sit down with elected officials. This process takes elected officials figuring out how they can, the amount of power that they have to be able to give the opportunity for the community to be at the table. And the last piece for us is, once we did these two, we had to figure out the board process many years ago, 40 years prior, where CBO nonprofits would come to the city council and say, I want 40,000. Our city council will go and try to pick winners and losers. And a year and a half ago, we said, we're not doing this of doing this piece here. And so we created, just like the steering for PB, we chose members from the community board process to help us figure out how to divvy up those funds. And this community partners board process works with PB every time they go out. So the community partners board, every time we had a budget, this board would come to us and say, these are the NGOs that you should fund. City council, it took the politics out of it because we were really tired of people coming and complaining and yelling at us because we're picking winners and choosers. Whatever the board recommendation is, those are the CBOs that we actually funded into our budget. And that was our process in Greensboro. Thank you for the opportunity today, and I'll be around for
the thing standing between you and lunch, so I know I'm in a very precarious position. But wanted to continue to mine the incredible resource we have in the room. I have a couple of questions. You answer actually many of my questions, so I'm also going to give some time for individuals from the audience to ask some questions too, and I know I'm throwing a wrench in the works here, so I'm going to need some of our volunteers to be ready with microphones as soon as I get my question asked. And then you can just raise your hand if you have one as well. So I'll start with the 30,000-foot level democracy. So I'm very interested in what Brian mentioned, an aspect of participatory budgeting is, and that is improving the quality of democracy. Justin, we can just work our way down. What is the one most important way participatory budgeting has improved the quality of democracy from your perspective in your community?
I think a way that, or something that has been improved is actually getting engagement from the different voices that haven't been historically heard. It's really important moving forward, knowing that in the future, as we become a more diverse society in America, it's important to have different voices and bring them to the table instead of like building different barriers that tend to leave them out. So building bridges and those in the community is really important.
Thank you. I would definitely agree with that, and especially with Seattle, youth have been more engaged in the program. I'd also say the community meetings we've had for idea generation, for recruiting budget delegates have kind of been an initiative to reflect more on how they can be engaged in deciding the budget of the city, deciding where their tax money goes, so that has kind of shown people that they really can make a difference.
Question, I think we could probably stay here for the rest of the day, the month, the year, talking about that one. So when I think about sort of how these programs have improved the quality of democracy, I would say that it's created an additional institutional space for non-traditional actors to have a voice. Protests are often have an important role. I mean, you could think think about some of the women's marches, the anti-gun and the violence marches that have been going on. Those are important type of public for affecting the public debate, but ways for new types of actors, I think, has been one of the key advances of these programs.
Thank you.
And I would say one of the biggest things is connecting politicians with a stronger relationship to their communities that they serve. Space for new voices and new leadership from the community ranks.
And all of that. The only thing that I would add is, you know, we need to change how democracy is functioning now. I think that is very clear on all scales of government. What does participatory budgeting, participatory democracy do? It creates a new mode of governance, and it challenges the status quo slightly.
Thank you. If you have it, now you're going to be groups later on over lunch, and you're going to come up with some table questions as well. So this isn't the last time you'll have to ask questions. But for now, we'll take a couple from the audience. I see Bernie, Paul, oh my God. Okay, you figure a mic. All right, Paul.
If the speakers would be able and willing to stretch a little bit beyond where you've already spoken, which is already, and imagine what true democratic budgeting would look like if a larger percentage every year of a city's budget or a county's budget was participatory in its decision-making nature, 50% more every year as the public took over decision-making about budgets rather than it just being a tiny percentage anywhere in the United States. Vision is at least starting to happen so that we have democratic budgeting.
Who would like to take that? Oh, Amy.
You know, that's a great question. I know in my experience just in the city of Seattle, going out and engaging folks around parks and streets, especially particularly within communities of color, I have young people of color that tell me, why should I care about parks and streets? I'm getting pushed out. I got massive police brutality, and I'm like, I hear you. I entirely hear you. And this is why participation is a tool. But what would it look like right now at the city of Seattle? There's a campaign for a no youth jail. And there's a lot of Black Lives Matters activists that are fighting the construction of a new detention center, hundreds of millions of dollars. What would it look like for us to apply participatory budgeting to criminal justice reform? That is something that excites me. And where I met Jim in Phoenix, we actually got to hear on a panel that particularly addressed police reform. And Scotland, actually, they put hundreds of millions police reform, and it's just starting. So that kind of gives you a demonstrated idea that, you know, we know that this nation, you know, what would it look like for us to address the prison industrial complex by changing how funding is allocated and distributed? And that's what I'm doing this work is that diagram, right? The idea, the project, I want folks to think about that as a framework much larger and bigger than filling a pothole or getting a crosswalk painted.
Yeah, let me just add on to Paul's question a little bit. The most robust cases that we've seen is around discretionary spending. You know, 5-6 year period, it starts to add up to real money where you can begin to sort of think about medium-sized infrastructure project, housing projects, some transportation changes. Beyond that, it becomes really difficult because you start addressing personnel, debt, and so I've seen cities claim they do 100% of the budget, but when you actually begin to look at it more closely, the most realistic about sort of what I think of sort of realistic is 100% of discretionary spending to do that. There has been sort of think about this at the state levels, in federal agencies like HUD. So under President Obama, Jamal mentioned sort of working in sort of being at the White House. So there was some initiatives under Obama to try to think about moving this into some of the federal agencies to think about this, sort of using pots of money to do it. There's been examples of states, but then that sort of increases the complexity when you sort of, if you start thinking about like a state like Oregon, and you've got, you know, hundreds of towns across the state, and how do you coordinate that? Where's the resource distribution? But I think the effort is to try to think about like, to maybe think about sort of the example like Paris, where they're at $100 million a year. How do you go from $3 million a year in Seattle to 120 million in Paris? And is that, or what types of spending, what type of resources are available? What's the structure that is possible?
Thank you, Brian. Who has the mic? Oh, here we go, please.
My name is Orlando Lopez, and I work for Zopol Environmental Justice. And I just wanted to ask a question, especially for the Honorable Councilman. You mentioned that a lot of people, especially politicians, once they get into a position of power, they don't want to give away their power. And budgeting is like a very powerful tool at the disposal of elected officials. So you as a representative of people, right? In advocating for participatory budgeting, because we're going to be pushing agencies, well, elected officials here to push for a participatory. But in a sense, it's also kind of asking them to give up some of their power. Yeah, how did your role evolve?
That's a great. I would say for me, my values it was well. Like I said, I was a college professor, and so I knew what the power. When I went out to communities, and I went to mosques, I went to churches, I went to barbershops, I went to salons, and I just started talking about what PB is. I went to other government entities and tried to get them to understand what PB community to get more people involved. I didn't go in saying, "Give me your power." That's the wrong approach. But I went in there as, you know, as an elected official in the city of Greensboro, trying to get more people of color and others at the table. I would tell you, in some parts of the community, Hispanic Latino community, they would shut the door. They wouldn't even talk to me. So I didn't have an approach. So I had to think, how do I get them involved? And they've been calling about they need bus transportation and they need other services. How do I get them involved into the table? And so it was really meeting them where they are and really talking about the advantages of PB and really democracy. If we're truly about the work of democracy, providing voices to the people, you know, I used to tell them, I got represented by the people, so I represent you. You know, I'm your voice. And so that's the work, and that's where I come from. And so I used to come and say, those are my values. This is why I'm here. Let's see what we can do to bring you across. Because a lot of politicians just didn't believe in, well, that's a waste of tax dollars. That's a waste of resources. Why should we put $500,000 to aside to buy some chessboards in the park? That doesn't make sense. We could put that money over here to build more sidewalks, or put that money over here to rehab this old building. But it's just trying to get them to understand, you know, why they were elected and who they serve and the people that they want to continue to serve if they want to still be in that role.
We're waiting for the next question. I have a follow-up question about the $50,000 controversy, shall we say. So clearly the group wanted that. Reasons why that was from a city standpoint. Could you tell us how you worked through that and what the value of having that kind of perhaps difficulty was?
I would say a lot of people with their values, and a lot of us stated, hey, this is what your community and your district wanted. We should move forward and do it. But the representative, a very conservative person in his district, and he felt like, we need to conserve those dollars. His goal was, you know what? I remember nights he said, Jamal, let's take that $50,000 and $50,000 of macaroni and cheese the needy in our community to feed them. And I said, well, that's not a bad idea, but that's going against the voices of the people. And so a lot of us on council looked at it, and it actually went to 2 or 3 meetings with this topic coming up. And so what we said is, city manager, go and look at and give us the cost of how much is it truly cost us $50,000. Can we look at doing something cheaper but still meet the goals of the community? And that's what we did. And so the excess of that $50,000 we took and we met the council member, his goal was, and bought some food for the community.
All right, Mike, thank you.
Gracias.
Later.
Nada más para que se relajen un poquito. Ya soy relax. Mi pregunta es, tomando en cuenta que muchas de las veces la comunidad escucha de proyectos una vez que ya fueron aprobados.
My question is just to take into consideration that the community, when they hear that the projects are approved,
¿puede la comunidad decir ya que es posible?
can say approved, that is not.
I would say from a council perspective, the projects that are voted on, so they'll move forward, but we might not could do all the projects within this fiscal year, so it may get phased in. And that's how we're trying to get majority of the projects through, is phasing in and make sure that we can balance the budget with as many projects as possible.
Let me just add on to that. I think there's a tension in a lot of the programs between sort of what you could think of as sort of the language of quick wins or smaller projects versus something that takes 3-4 years. So one of the things is that some of the larger projects and sort of especially some of the social service projects that may be implemented, if you vote in 2018, they may not arrive till 2021. And so I think as people are thinking about this, there's a benefit to sort of encourage projects that can be implemented the following year, connection, but then there's also a benefit to try to sort of saying, well, it's actually, some of the bigger projects may not come for 2 years. So trying to sort of think about sort of the spacing out of projects over a number of years, sort of the size of resources would be the difference when they're implemented.
Thanks. Other questions? There we go.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know it was coming to me directly. I did research for years on the development and effectiveness of Portland's neighborhood system, right? Line of its effectiveness, I don't want to get into that issue. In civic education, participation was for what it was. Civic education made up of both ethical and skill-based, so that people right have that to even understand kinds of issues. organized a transportation planning class, took 8 weeks, which is a big investment too, so that citizen and government officials loved it because one of the people were going to really understand their issue. So I just am kind of curious about that.
So can we cut you off there so that we have a chance to respond?
I'm cutting myself off, I was just saying.
Thank you. Anyone want to about the civic education aspect of this?
Yeah, I can start and then one of the things that we're finding, or thinking about this sort of more broadly, I think the emphasis on the youth is really an effort to try to return to that civic engagement piece, how we can create citizens, how we can create individuals who can engage and who are knowledgeable about the engagement process. So I think the youth PB is really situated around that. I don't know if either of you two can speak to that. The other thing that we've also really found is that these processes, especially with the budget delegates, the budget type delegates, create a new generation of leaders who have a much broader base of knowledge. This is in the United States, but this is also across the world. So one of the things, so short term, it has this positive effect. There could be a long-term negative where you're just you're creating a new sense of an old guard, but the initial point is sort of trying to expand the base of non-traditional actors, the base of knowledge among non-traditional actors, so that they begin to engage this process. So some of the survey work that we did in Brazil, holding workshops and doing education for these budget delegates, important than doing workshops for the average citizen who just wanted to vote. And if you just got him or her to go out and vote, that was positive because they're engaging, they're thinking about it. Information that is being passed to and then used by new, as well as new community leaders, is a real vital part of the process. Let's up there and see if anybody else has anything to add.
All right, new question. Where's that microphone?
Mi pregunta en español y luego la voy a decir en inglés para la gente que está más cómoda en español. So, participación pública más porque hay gente que tiene obstáculos cuando usamos términos legales como residente en lugar de o las medidas electorales con el Estado para votar. So my question is based on how do we make public participation a right rather than like resident, which has a legal connotation and excludes members of our community who might not be able to register to vote with the state. Your participation is excellent, but it uses the term resident 3 different times. So how do we make sure that people who might not be counted otherwise still get to say what they want to prioritize in the members of the city, and they are community members as well?
That's a great question. I think New York City has really taken the lead in that appeal to resident in the sense of somebody who lives in the city or works in the city, as opposed to their legal status. And so I think a lot of the individual as opposed to legal status. Back to those 2 cases that I know better. Effort to do a lot of translation of documents, making it eligible of a certain age. So Chicago case in the 1st district that Joe Moore is a city council member, they made a population of U.S. citizens, non-legal residents. That's when it comes down to the government of who they're going to reach out to. What's the recruitment process to bring?
Amy,
from a Seattle perspective, we don't require to vote. We actually don't ask citizens, we don't ask for your address. We again recognize that is in an affordable housing crisis, that in that neighborhood, that doesn't mean that you don't that neighborhood. So that's why we let folks choose which district to vote in. And we do not require address or, and we put a lot of our budget in access.
Up there, where's the microphone?
Excuse me, Brian, I think at the beginning you additional support behind participatory, and I was wondering if we could compare Seattle. Councilor, when you were speaking, it sounded like in Greensboro there was more of a bottom-up push, folks coming to city council. Whereas in Seattle there was the Youth Commission, the Department of Neighborhoods. So wondering if that lights you can share.
So that's a great question. One that to identify is when you are able to sort of create at the initial point a joint government officials and civil society organizations or community organizations. It's the case that it's a city council member, he or she goes off and learns about it and brings it back. The organization that brings it up. So I think it's there's not a lot of evidence that one way is better than the other, but there is evidence that demonstrates just trying to have that collaboration moment is really crucial. The advantage of doing it in an executive-led model is there tend to be overtime help, and you can sort of have a bigger scope. You can begin to think about, okay, what we want to do is we want to have a combination of bigger types of projects. When it's district focused, like the single-member district in a city council office, it's smaller scale and can't grow as much. So they're trying to be creative in New York. If the mayor or the executive sort of takes it on, you're sort of constrained. One of the things they did is that they did, because Mexico City is sort of this multiple jurisdictions, municipal level jurisdictions, is they actually a valley-wide PB process that connected different municipalities. You're trying to figure out ways to sort of solve some of these issues in common that run across different municipalities. There's been some examples of environmental groups, for example, trying to use PB that again is not tied to the municipality, but more of a sort of a watershed region in order to sort of think about how resources could be spent in that area. So I think that sort of going back to sort of to your question, it's sort of this thinking about sort of this joint tie between government and at the beginning.
Thanks, Brian. I have time for a couple more questions, and I have another one of my own. Because that way.
Do you want me to go over here or go back here?
Jerry?
Okay. I don't want to stand by the speaker. My name's Jerry Jimenez. I work for the Office of... I would say that 7 years, we've created major changes in the way we do work organization, doing most on immigrant and refugee, people of color, low income. We've graduated over 1,000 people through our civic engagement program in the last years. And so when it was called upon that maybe only, it actually started changing, and it continues to change, and we're doing great work. Sorry for that commercial, but my biggest burning question was, for Jamal, welcome to Portland, how do we deal with the fact that we have form of government at the city, and four of the five elected officials live in one area. Nobody's from out here, you know, so I'd just like to know what you had to say about that.
Say about that.
I would say that there's, and I'll say this, 40 years ago, we went from what Portland has today. We had 7 white men, and we tried to do a form of PB then of getting community members to understand the budget. It wasn't going anywhere. It didn't happen until with the NAACP and other organizations standing up and fighting to change our form of government. And that's why we got a 5-3-1 system today. And that opened up to 2 minority districts out of the 5 represented it. Our first black mayor was in 2007. You know, 1940 when Greensboro was created, or 1840 when Greensboro was created. So there's a lot of similarities. I would say as a community, it's PB is created within a community and for that community. So the ideas and things that you heard today, Portland or Gresham or Troutdale, you're going to have to create PB for your community. One of the things is, I would say, a city manager form of government. If the community stood up and said, hey, we need to change our form of government, I would say yes, tomorrow. That will help, because having that citywide concept, efficiencies and effectiveness, I would say 2 weeks ago, Durham, North Carolina, you know, they just voted and they see for their community. When you start looking at and others, Richmond, Virginia changed their form in 2005 for some of the same situations going on in their community. So that may be an avenue that the community throughout the Portland region look at, is your form of government and how effective is that form of government, because it's commission-based.
Go ahead, Amy.
And so Seattle is actually, we just concluded in this last election cycle our second round of district-based city council voting. 7 council districts, 2 at-large positions, and women of color city council. I mean, it's amazing, and it gets and you hear it, how the discourse has changed within the committees and in their conversations on the dais.
Thanks, Amy. Okay, one more audience question, and then I'm going to ask mine. Yes, please.
Delgado.
My name is Maria Delgado.
Yo solamente quiero mencionar que yo me identifico como la persona que vivía en parques.
I would like to mention that I identify as a person, like you said, in parks.
Basado a mi experiencia, eso es lo que me ha servido para tener una buena comunitaria latina.
Based on my experience, that was led me to be a person who is a good Latina community participant.
Porque llego a entender mi comunidad.
Because I became able to understand my community.
¿Cuáles son sus barreras?
What are the barriers?
El idioma.
The language.
El racismo.
Racism. Mental health issues.
Su trabajo. Totalmente de un país a otro.
The change country to another.
Yo fui parte de la redada del 2007 del Monte.
I was part of the raids they did on the Del Monte organization in 2007.
Fui parte o líder del grupo de mujeres del
I was one of the leaders of the women group.
Y de involucrarme porque vi más
involved because I saw that there was so much need.
Pero este tipo de situaciones muy fuertes también conlleva enfermedades.
That kind of situation is very difficult and causes lots of problems, lots
Caí en
of
la
sickness and illness.
Caí en la depresión.
You become depressed.
Me casaron con cáncer de piel.
I am a survivor of skin cancer.
Violencia doméstica.
Violence.
Mamá soltera.
Single mother.
Infinidad de cosas donde yo puedo entender a la comunidad.
Many things that lead me to be able to understand.
Y puedo decir que la comunidad latina lo que necesita es
And what I can say is that what the Latino community needs is to be heard.
espacio,
space,
y que realmente con ellos. Realmente seamos claros y transparentes con ellos.
And that we be transparent and clear with the members of the community.
Eso es lo que me ha ayudado para mi trabajo. Trabajo para una organización.
That is what helped me. That is what has helped me in my work. I work for an organization called Unite Oregon.
Un grupo de padres latinos de las escuelas públicas de Portland.
With a group of parents from students in Portland Public Schools.
Pero los padres han creído basado en lo que yo y que ellos se reflejen en mí.
But parents have grown based on what it is that they see reflected in me and the.
Para mí no es tanto lo que yo gano en dinero.
It's not so much about what I earn money-wise,
sino a quién yo alcanzo.
But rather, who is it that I am able to reach?
A quién yo he podido apoyar.
Who have I been able to support?
Y esa persona a quien ha apoyado.
And who has that person then been able to support?
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you.
I'm just going to invite anyone to respond to that who wishes to. Jamal?
I would say thank you for being here and your perspective. Just listening to some of the challenges and concepts, through your time about how we're involved in community, in government in general. And it made me think of one concept we did in Greensboro when I was there is, we had City Academy. And basically, City Academy was where individuals who, lived in our park or had certain issues, they went through a 10-week program, and they got to learn every aspect of the budget office, the planning, the city manager's office, and they were able to use their voice to provide us feedback of, things that they saw that they can help change. And so that may be another avenue, that can be created here, a City Academy of such. That you can be able to share, the issues and things that you went through to help others and bring others up so they don't have to go through what you went through. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamal. And that is going to be the last question. So I just want to thank again the panel for their incredible expertise. You will be grabbing your lunch, and then you all should tag that has a number on it, and that corresponds to a number that will soon be on a table. We'd like you to organize yourself at those tables, and the facilitator will be there to greet you to get you going on the next part of the dialogues. It's now your time to talk, so grab lunch. Thank you.
And guys, also just a quick announcement. Make sure that if you haven't signed up,